Good evening, afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Aquarian series. This evening, the title of the presentation is The Law of Sacrifice. Our beloved Shobha Sharma will present for us. Shobha?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Monica. First of all, I just want to say, I never get to say this. I'm deeply grateful to Jonathan to keep doing these Aquarian series because each one is so intriguing and exciting. And it doesn't matter who's presenting it. I just find it all so wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan. Here. When I arrived in this country several years ago, I remember seeing a commercial about baseball and sacrifice. I had no idea about baseball, and least of all what sacrifice meant here. I learned years later that when the batter decides to bunt or hits a fly ball, the runners can advance and score. Then he might, in the process, get out, and that is called a sacrifice. I was quite impressed with the concept, realizing that one person was willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of the team. Many processes in nature follow this model, albeit unconsciously. A rudimentary form of life, the single cell has a duty to perform, namely divide itself in two. This is evolution, and the cell sacrifices itself for posterity. This process repeats itself again and again for centuries. We see this behavior also in the seed that one sows in the soil disappearing, sacrificing itself for the shoots, the flowers fading and sacrificing themselves for the fruit, and finally even some fruits allow themselves to form seeds for future propagation. What did the cell in the first example gain by this process? But for this sacrifice, we would not have the complex forms of life and the different evolving kingdoms and the myriad species that we have. Let me explain. The cells did not even realize their powers, but they were paving the way for more experienced entities. The homogeneous substance, the cell, did not waste any time and began to show differences as it kept dividing to multiply and become more complex. This means that the complexity finally gave rise to the mineral kingdom, which led to the vegetable kingdom. With more sacrifices and more complex transformations, the animal kingdom appeared. It was necessary for the plant to sacrifice itself to nourish and sustain the animal kingdom. In addition, as we study the extinction of certain species in the animal kingdom and the evolution of newer species, we see that Darwin's theory about the survival of the fittest makes sense. There is a sacrifice of the species going extinct to transform to a fitter species. The Kabbalah says the stone becomes a plant, the plant an animal, the animal a man, the man a god. H.P. Blavatsky actually quotes from this in the summing up portion, I think, of the first volume of The Secret Doctrine. Now, if it weren't for this automatic form of sacrifice by the mineral, vegetable, animal kingdoms, we would not have arrived at this self-conscious and thinking being that we call man. Now, this being does not follow the law of sacrifice unconsciously, but uses his thinking and reasoning principle to make it voluntary and deliberate. All actions are self-induced and self-devised. Man is on this planet the most evolved of all the other kingdoms we have just talked about. What a golden opportunity he has to use his thinking principle, his manas, to be creative, noble, and do amazing things. Yet the paradox of being human and having choices seems to make him the servant of the quaternary, the lower quaternary, and be swayed by his passions and desires. Even though man has so much potential, it is indeed a hard life to be human and fight against baser instincts. The Dhammapada says in chapter 14, difficult it is to obtain birth as a human being. Difficult it is to live the life of a human being. Difficult it is to get to hear the true law. Difficult it is to attain to enlightenment. It is interesting to note that the two component parts of the word sacrifice, which together mean a rendering sacred by an act of worship or giving. There is the spirit of consecration inherent in this word. Something is made sacred by the very acts of worship and giving. In the Hindu tradition that I grew up with, I remember my grandmother having a bath before proceeding to cook. Every day she would pray to her gods and keep cooked food in front of the gods, calling it a naivedyam, an offering, a sacrifice before she or anybody would partake of it. Man needs to work on sacrifice consciously and continuously to yearn for something better. Yet around us we see and hear sacrifice being performed by mankind in various ways. In India, I do remember the elders in our family going to Banaras, or Kashi as they called it, coming back with the sealed containers of the sacred Ganges water and not eating something that they enjoyed eating before. That was a sacrifice they would undertake. Also, these same elders and their families would go to the temples and donate gifts of sacred butter, rice, and even gold and silver as an offering to their various gods on a regular basis. There was also fasting and minimal eating on special phases of the moon that were also forms of sacrifice. Besides the bloodless sacrifices of fruits, flowers, butter, milk, yogurt, honey, etc., that was carried out by my family members, there were other communities who gave life itself of animals. We also know that human sacrifices were especially popular in ancient ceremonies for many countries. This kind of animal, humans that were chosen for sacrifice, were usually of the best and the strongest. This was critical to please the gods and carry on the life harmoniously. When one reads the Odyssey, Odysseus and his crew stop and kill animals and have a feast to appease the gods so their journey back home is completed without too much loss and delay. In the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Some devotees give sacrifice to the gods, while others, lighting the subtler fire of the Supreme Spirit, offer up themselves. Still others make sacrifice with the senses, beginning with hearing in the fire of self-restraint. And some give up all sense-delighting sounds. And others again, illuminated by spiritual knowledge, sacrifice all the functions of the senses and vitality in the fire of devotion through self-constraint. There are also those who perform sacrifice by wealth given in alms, by mortification, by devotion, and by silent study. Some sacrifice the up-breathing for the down-breathing, and the down-breathing in the up-breathing by blocking up the channels of inspiration and expiration, and others by stopping the movements of both the life breaths. Still others, by abstaining from food, sacrifice life in their life." So the word sacrifice takes on different connotations for different humans, but it is also talking here about different planes of sacrifice. As students of theosophy, we also are aware of several pitfalls in some of these sacrifices. The motive, the purity of thought influence our attitude towards any kind of sacrifice we may attempt. Talking about motive and sacrifice, I cannot but help think of the remarkable Nachiketas in the Katha Upanishads. When I first heard the word Katha, I assumed it meant story, because a derivative of the Sanskrit word Katha means narration. Actually, it is the name of the person who wrote this Upanishad. I heard this story from my father when I was young, and even then I was struck by the precocity of the young lad. Now, the Upanishads are part of the Vedas, sacred texts of the Hindus. While most of the Vedas deal with rules and regulations for daily living for Hindus, the Upanishads contain the essence of the philosophy of the Hindu religion. So now the story of Katha Upanishad is basically about sacrifice. It starts with a certain kind of sacrifice and continues with an altogether different level of sacrifice. In the beginning of the story, Vajasravas is conducting a sacrifice and is giving away some of his cattle, his cows. Nachiketas, his young son, observed that his father is giving away cows that are old and are no longer producing milk. He is upset that his father is doing such an act to gain merit. He thinks, cattle that have drunk their water, eaten their grass, yielded their milk, worn out their organs, and in Sanskrit, Pithodaka Jagdatrina Dukta Doha Nirindriya. With distress in his heart, he continues to ponder. Of undelight are the worlds which he reaches, who gives such as these. And in Sanskrit, Ananda Namate Lokastansa Gachati Tha Dadat. Aloud he says to his father, "To whom wilt thou give me? He asks him 3 times, and the father responds in anger, "To death will I give you." And so the story continues as Nachiketas obediently goes out to seek the god of death, Yama. He reaches the abode of Yama and waits for 3 days. Yama returns, and he is horrified that a spiritual guest, a Brahman to his place, has been waiting and not received with reverence. Yama says, "You waited 3 inhospitable days and nights, and I grant you 3 boons, one for each night." And what do you think Nachiketas asks as his first wish or boon? He says, "Let my father, tranquilized in his thought and serene of mind, let his passion over me pass away from him. Assured in heart, let him greet me from thy grasp delivered." Nachiketas wishes that his father's anger is appeased, and he receives him with love when he returns to earth. Here is Nachiketa's first sacrifice. It is not about him, but his father. His sacrifice is full of compassion. And Yama grants his wish, saying that his father will welcome him back from the jaws of death with love. Now, why is Yama so powerful and can grant his wishes? It is stated by Aurobindo in his rendition of the Upanishads that Yama, the Lord of Death, is also the master of the law in the world, and he is therefore the child of the sun, luminous master of truth, from which the law is born. Now, Aurobindo was a very famous Indian philosopher, but before he was a philosopher and a yogi and a mystic, he was a journalist, and he was also a freedom fighter because he lived during the late 19th century and the early 20th century. But later, as I said, he became a philosopher, a mystic, and a yogi, and wrote several books. One of his most famous is called The Life Divine, and I love his rendition of the Upanishads as well. So let's get back to the story now. For his second boon, Nachiketas requests instruction on the fire sacrifice, calling it the heavenly flame. This heavenly flame, according to Aurobindo, is a celestial flame concealed subconsciously in man's mortality. This is not a physical flame of a sacrifice. Nachiketas is requesting spiritual knowledge through initiation at the feet of his teacher Yama. Once it is kindled and its right ordering transcends his earthly nature. Yama teaches him the fire sacrifice and watches Nachiketas repeat his words and is well pleased. He says to Nachiketas that he will give this sacrifice the name Nachiketa's fire. He tells the young boy that the triple performance of this sacrifice would lead to heaven and moksha, Nachiketa's second sacrifice on a higher level. But there is one more boon left, and Nachiketas asks a question about whether man exists or not after death. Yama is flabbergasted and flummoxed by the question and wishes to evade it. He tries to sidestep the question by promising him plenty of earthly delights, and he names them all. However, Nachiketas is not interested in any of that because he says it is all temporary. and rejects it for the sake of true knowledge, this final sacrifice. He asks questions about karma and explains the world we live in. Yama, after a lot of hesitation, finally grants him this boon. And here, the true, deeper instruction begins about the nature of the self, the laws of karma, and the meaning of Brahman. So, when we look at the story of Nachiketas, we see that sacrifice is a law, it is not just an act. What do I mean by that? The Jewish philosopher Maimonides pointed out that sacrifice as rituals decreased when people grew in spiritual power. The outer expression of sacrifice was no longer important, since what was more significant was how each man lived his life. The rabbis said, for every man's life and character are his own altar and ritual. Again, look at what Krishna says in the same 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he mentions the different forms of sacrifices. He says, the sacrifice through spiritual knowledge is superior to sacrifice made with material things. Every action, without exception, is comprehended in spiritual knowledge, O son of Pritha. And later on in the chapter, he adds, no actions bind the man who through spiritual discrimination hath renounced action and cut asunder all doubt by knowledge, O despiser of wealth. This Katha Upanishad story illustrates these words. Furthermore, it indicates that for Nachiketas, it was the most natural and proper thing to do. When we looked earlier at the behavior of nature and its manner of sacrifice to transform from mineral to vegetable to animal and finally the human stage, we realize that this process is regular, periodic, and definitely follows a law. The idea of sacrifice is woven into the universal fabric. Even the gods are governed by this law, as is shown in this story from the Aztecs. The legend says that the world with all the living beings was destroyed periodically by floods, fire, and other cataclysms. The only way to recreate the world is by the tremendous effort of the gods. The bright gods are personified by Quetzalcoatl, who need to overcome the gods of darkness, whose leader is Tezcatlipoca. The legend states that worlds and their humanity were gradually being perfected through the process of destruction and regeneration. At the last great cataclysm, the sun itself was engulfed, and there was no light for the world. This called for a sacrifice from the gods, one of whom must give up his life and be transformed into the new sun. 2 gods offered themselves. One was proud and rich and brought balls of copal and liquid amber as his gift, and spines fashioned from rare coral. The other god, who was poor and humble, had nothing to offer but balls of grass and maguey spines, dyed in the blood of his own sacrifice. On the chosen day, each of the gods who were offering themselves had to fall into the sacred brazier in which the great fire roared. He who succeeded would come forth purified to lighten up the world with his radiance. 3 times the rich god attempted to leap in, but at the last minute, his heart failed him. Then it was the turn of the poor, destitute god. With a great effort, he plunged in, and the fire consumed him in a burst of flame. The rich god felt ashamed of being cowardly and did the same, followed by 2 other gods, the jaguar and the eagle gods. What a sight! Out came the sun. However, it hung in the horizon, which meant that other gods and stars had to sacrifice themselves. Then followed a great war in heaven when the new sun triumphed, symbolizing that universal sacrifice was necessary to sustain his work. This legend and the story from the Katha Upanishad are talking about the importance and also the universality of sacrifice, making it a law, not just a solitary action by random individuals. In an article called The Law of Sacrifice, which appeared in the Theosophy magazine, June 1925, B.P. Wadia starts out by stating that the word sacrifice is misunderstood. He says, in the East, the conception has deteriorated till yajna for some is akin to animal sacrifice at the altar of the gods, or for others, it is sundry ritualistic performances. In Christendom, the sacrifice of Christ who died on the cross for our salvation with its attendant vicious beliefs in vicarious atonement is the corrupted expression of a sublime truth known to the world centuries before the Christian era. And what is that sublime truth? Mr. B.P. Wadia says that it is the true meaning of yajna or yajna, and H.P. Blavatsky's Theosophical Glossary gives us a hint. When we look at the word yajna on page 375 of the glossary, we see a big paragraph talking about a constellation, a thrice sacred science. It says this sacrifice is a bridge to communicate with the Devas and mentions the sacred pranava, the sacred word. B.P. Wadia explains it beautifully by stating, the self-energized, willful and thoughtful offering which wisdom makes for the growth of the weak and the ignorant, joyously because with a purpose, is sacrifice or yajna. Mr. Wadia talks about nature as one, and beings act and react with one another. Circles and cycles and rounds and globes are formed. Human beings may be ignorant of karma and reincarnation, and yet are reborn again and again to work out the causes generated in previous lives through the law of cycles. Yet, in all this, they benefit from the sacrifices of the hosts of higher intelligences and also sacrifice themselves for the hosts of lower intelligences. In The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, H.P. Blavatsky states, the Ahi Dhyan Chohans are the collective hosts of celestial beings who are the vehicle for the manifestation of the divine or universal thought and will. They are intelligent forces that give to and enact in nature laws, while themselves acting according to laws imposed upon them in a similar manner by still higher powers. But they are not the personifications of the powers of nature, as erroneously thought. This hierarchy of spiritual beings through which the universal mind comes into action is like an army, a host truly, by means of which the fighting power of a nation manifests itself, and which is composed of army corps, divisions, brigades, regiments, and so forth, each with its separate individuality or life and its limited freedom of action and limited responsibilities, each contained in a larger individuality to which its own interests are subservient, and each containing lesser individualities in itself. So now we understand that sacrifice is not just a verb, but a law. We have already noted that man has gone through a series of transformations and sacrifices, starting from the mineral through the vegetable, the animal, and finally to the human stage. Not only that, B.P. Wadia says, if you look at him as a sevenfold being, you see something more. Thus, and he says, that pole of our being, which is the lower material, enjoys the sacrificial offering of the higher spiritual. Thus, Buddhi comes to be because Atma limits itself by its own inherent power. Body is formed because prana sacrifices itself as a connecting, nourishing link, holding in unison the countless lives who make the form, rupa. Manas sacrifices itself to redeem the karmic nature by the same law of yajna which joins buddhi to manas. All the while we need to remember that men are different, but man is one. And this man is a small copy of nature. Beautiful words by B.P. Wadia. As we come to the end of this presentation, it is important to gather the ideas and summarize them. From the stories, we learn that sacrifice is essential to reach immortality. More fundamentally, it is apparent that sacrifice as a law is prevalent everywhere. In fact, when we as students of theosophy look at the three fundamentals, the law of yajna or sacrifice is present at every step. Manifestation would not occur without the presence of sacrifice, which is also the law of compassion and pure desire, not in the way in which we mortals think of it. As the voice of the silent says in fragment 3, canst thou destroy divine compassion? Compassion is no attribute. It is the law of laws, eternal harmony, alaya self, a shoreless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and fitness of all things, the law of love eternal. This compassion is the eternal law of sacrifice that we see all around us and within us. It never leaves us and is a part of our evolution. Once man fully understands this, when he reaches the threshold of enlightenment and is given the two choices, he then can naturally lean towards the path of renunciation because it has been ingrained in every fabric of his being. Thank you. I can't hear you.
Who is called on?
Thank you. Shobha, this presentation was just Magnificent. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Shobha?
I think I see Judy's hand. Pardon me, Judy.
Yes,
Judy's hand, and then Miluka.
thank you for a wonderful insight into the Upanishads and the idea of sacrifice. And I have actually a very simple question. It was once asked in our lodge, addressing Professor Nandini Iyer, who of course was very knowledgeable. Is meditation a sacrifice? And she said no, more that it was a duty. But then I read in Robert Crosby in one of his letters that he said if you're meditating in the morning before breakfast and you're hungry, that it's more of a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So is it the being hungry that's a sacrifice, that you're giving up something you would like to do, eating for meditation? Or is meditation itself a kind of sacrifice? Because I think perhaps it's also a duty. So I wondered if you could help me out on this.
Great question, Judy. I think when you're truly meditating, why would you even think of hunger, right? Mm-hmm. So it won't even come through to you, right? Now, when you look at the story of Katha Upanishad, the whole thing is a meditation. The fact that Nachiketas goes willingly to Yama, the fact that Nachiketas is already, like I said, he's a precocious lad. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is far more evolved than his father. And so the whole process where he goes, not one of those boons that he asks for is for himself, right? Even though in a certain sense, it may seem like that, but it was all for the sake of learning and knowledge and being wise enough to come back and be compassionate to his father, right? I mean, he sets it up in such a way that the first boon is about making sure this father understands that he wasn't criticizing him and was feeling sad about it. He wasn't angry or upset with his father. It was more a question of sadness. And I think true meditation, I feel, has to be a sacrifice, because it's when you even, I think the problem today is meditation is being talked about, like, I think Jerry said this, Jerry Kiffe said that it's formulaic. And you can do it in a certain way, but meditation is a life's work. It doesn't come easily. So the process of meditation does require sacrifice. But again, I feel, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I feel if sacrifice is like, oh, I have to do this, like a Cub Scout, right? I have to do this to get my badges, right? I have to do this. I have to give money because I've got to do it. And people put up plaques saying they donated so much, right? In churches and temples. And so that's not sacrifice. And Krishna says that too, right? It has to be unconscious. It has to be natural. That's why it's a law. So I think when you are thinking of true meditation, it is a sacrifice. But this is the trouble with the word sacrifice, right? It is a law of laws. So it has to be a natural process. Does that help, Judy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Fantastic. Miluka?
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say that was so inspiring, and I can feel your heart when you was expressing it. It was really, really wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And one thing that made me think about it, all these sacrifices, as above, below, the planets sacrifice themselves. They give us some of the material, and then the Kumaras have to sacrifice their life to give us, spark the light within us. And then the parents have to sacrifice to bring the mother, to bring a child into this world. So you're right. The line of sacrifices is, above and below all levels, and it's wonderful. I'm going to mention something about, I just heard a lecture for a very distinguished physicist, and he was talking about that when you're going to, that the average person, 70 to 80, according to the study, they take about 3 billion breaths before they die in total. And I was thinking that I heard that when you do meditation, you actually prolong your life because you slow down your heart rate. So it really is a sacrifice, but at the long run, meditation is slow you down and you could live a longer life. So it seems.
Thank you, Maluka. And sacrifice is everywhere. When I started working on this, I suddenly thought about it and I said, wait a minute, it's everywhere. And so many of this is unconscious. Only man has this thing, right? He has this manas. He has this, he can, aim towards something higher, or he can go towards the lower quaternary. And the choice makes it so much more complex when it comes to man and sacrifice. But look at all the other kingdoms. Look at everything around us. And, I thought of another thing in this, and I didn't even mention it in this because as it is, was getting to be a big lecture on my part. But I was thinking about it's like a leela, the word they use in Sanskrit. It's like a dance. It's also like a music. It's so rhythmic and beautiful because there's this there is this give and take, and the words that H.P. Blavatsky uses and that B.P. Wadia talks about is so beautiful because it says there's sacrifice by higher individuals, but there's also sacrifice being done by the man to other lower individuals. So there is this constant flow. There is this constant rhythm. There is this constant music that is going on in this whole cosmos that we live in. So I find that it's just seems to be a natural thing. It's not something forced. Laura, you had your hand up? I don't know.
Well, I'm just wondering about the nature of devotion in relation to sacrifice. You mentioned the one kind of sacrifice where we do it from a selfish point of view. But sometimes, when you think of the person who sacrifices their honesty to get a loaf of bread for someone who's hungry, and, sometimes we have to sacrifice as a real giving of ourselves, almost like we will leave the results to law. We are completely devoted to the well-being of others, that we'll even create more karma for ourselves. That's another form of sacrifice. It just as HPB, when she came in, she took upon herself the karma of the race she sacrificed herself to that as well. So what is the nature of devotion in regards to sacrifice?
I think it's such a lovely question and such great comments, Laura. Thank you. I think they're all related, right? I mean, what is true devotion? Sacrifice. When I think of sacrifice immediately, I think of the sacrifice of something to the gods that I saw all my life among my relatives, all of them, my family members. Some of them were more sincere than others. I have to say my grandmother was unique because she wouldn't eat anything in the night except 2 handfuls of something. And I thought, wow, what a lovely concept of not eating much at night instead of gorging yourself with food. I see most people going to restaurants and eating and, all the rest of it. So I just thought, what a wonderful way. And there was a lot of devotion in her. She lived a very simple life. Her major problem in life was they were living from paycheck to paycheck, my grandparents, on my maternal side especially. And it was a very hard life because she not only took care, talk about sacrifice, she not only took care of her own children, she took care of her daughter who died very young, one of my aunts. She took care of all 4 children in her house. Talk about a sacrifice there. Already they had little money, and here she was. So I think sacrifice goes with so many other words that we hear in the Gita, right? Devotion. Devotion is a word that keeps coming in almost every chapter of the Gita. And what is devotion? It's not a kind of, the immediate idea that comes to this mind of mine is some kind of blind faith. It's definitely not that. Devotion, in the true sense of the word, is thinking about the universality of everything, right? When you think about the universality, and then there's the law of sacrifice, which is also a universal law. It's all connected. So I definitely think devotion plays a role in the sacrifice, the idea of sacrifice.
Beautiful. Desiree?
Hi, everybody. And Shobha, that was beautiful. Wonderful
Thank
storyteller you are.
Thank you.
The relationship between, and it's not even a relationship because I think that, as you stated, karma, and not karma, but compassion is the law, and sacrifice is compassion, truly. So it's not a subject and object situation, it's one and the same. And I think that in our booklet, MLK puts it very plainly by saying, you may even give your body to be burned and die the death of a martyr, and your spilt blood may be a symbol of honor for generations yet unborn, and thousands may praise you as one of history's greatest heroes. But if you have not love, your blood was spilt in vain.
Right.
And that really speaks to the individual acting the deed without any concern for him or herself
Right.
or any results, as if that personality no longer existed for its own survival, except for that how it may help the survival of others or ease their pain. And that is true love. And I think we have a wonderful symbol, courtesy of our Rosicrucians, of the pelican or the seagull opening up its belly to feed its children with its intestines and entrails and whatnot, that it does it out of love. And without that, because those are synonymous terms, love, sacrifice, and compassion can be used, interchangeably, I guess.
Yeah. That's why I thought of the word desire arose. I mean, that desire, what was that desire? Not the desire where we think about it. It was like, beings need to be, I'm not saying that it said these things, but I can imagine that evolution is essential, right? For growth. Evolution is essential for growth. And so there has to be manifestation, right? Otherwise you could have been in pralaya all the time. It's like, I think about moksha and liberation as, fantastic. I'm in heaven. I don't need to do anything. But the Buddha didn't think of it that way. He made the supreme sacrifice by coming on earth, right? To teach men, right? He came. So the path of renunciation versus the path of liberation shows the fact of manifestation shows that
Exactly.
you cannot live without that sacrifice. So I think whatever you said, Desiree, was beautiful. Yeah, it all fits into this pattern of the giving, and the giving selflessly. And I always think of The Light on the Path, one of my favorite books, next to The Voice of the Silence. I mean, they're all wonderful books, but I have my favorites. Is to appear as nothing in the eyes of men.
Yes.
That is the greatest power that the disciple can crave. Something like that, it says in The Light on the Path. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful thing. And somebody else said, to dare, to will, to act, and to remain silent, right?
There you go.
I don't know who said it, but I can never remember that.
I think
But
Yeah,
but it's
I'm
another
wondering
beautiful,
too.
yeah. So
I'm
yeah,
wondering
so
too. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead.
Think about sacrifice as being actually that archetype. That aren't we sacrificing ourselves even to be here, in a sense?
Yeah,
Because it's part of who and what we are
yeah,
as one. We are sacrificing ourselves. It's almost like the Atman sacrifices a part of itself through
Yeah.
Buddhi. Buddhi sacrifices a part of itself
yeah.
to Manas, and Manas sacrifices itself to lower Manas. It's like
Right.
part of my rib and
I had,
given it to you.
Desiree, I had never thought of it that way till I read B.P. Wadia's article, and I thought, yes, that makes perfect
archetype.
sense.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's the same
So-
pattern being repeated, and that's why
Yeah.
we're here.
yeah. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you for your words.
You. Beautiful.
Thank you.
fantastic. Laura?
Well, that nature of sacrifice that was just discussed brought what Mr. Wadia said, that men are different, but man is one.
Mhm.
And at the beginning of your talk, you started off with the cell and the components of the cell. And in
Mhm.
reading today, we read that the DNA of a plant and an animal and a human is almost always almost the same.
Wow.
And there's only a little bit of it that becomes different. And I often wonder at the beginning of your talk, when you spoke a little on evolution and unfolding and the
Mhm.
sacrifice, and the process of becoming, it's interesting that we can take that sacrifice right back to the molecular level, to
Right.
the cell. One thing has to stop being something to become something else.
Absolutely.
The mineral has to stop being a mineral to become a vegetable. And it's interesting that there's this continuity on the physical plane of the DNA that travels through all the forms
Yeah.
and is very similar.
Yeah. The physical is the last expression of what is happening in the other planes. It's just so beautiful that Mr. B.P. Wadia talks about this concept of sacrifice within the sevenfold classification. And I thought, wow, never thought of it that way, and it just gave a new meaning to the whole concept of what it means to be here, what it means to be with other species, right? And it just, that's why I thought of the song, listen to, in The Light on the Path, it also says, listen to the song of life somewhere. And I thought, this is a song. This is a music. This is a dance. It's a leela. Now it all, I mean, not that I get it all, but it's like, okay, that's what they were trying to say.
So beautiful. I just want to say this at the beginning, or that part of the presentation when you were talking about how each kingdom sacrifices in order to make a better version of itself.
Right.
The flow of that continues until we get to man. It made me think of man's dharma to care about the other kingdoms.
Right.
And it gives me the perspective that what we're actually doing when we take care of the animal kingdom or the vegetable kingdom or whichever, that we're actually paying back, honoring their sacrifice that they first gave to us so that we could come into existence in the form that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thank you for widening our perspective. But more questions, Jim and Michelle?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Shobha. That was eloquent, to say the least.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
But I have a question. I think it might be I'm confused on a point. You used the phrase about unconscious, sacrifice being unconscious. And that, for me, requires some clarification, which you might have given earlier and I missed. So you could help me understand it, because I can see saying that sacrifice is spontaneous at a certain point, because in terms of the worldly consciousness, sacrifice in terms of self-sacrifice is very rare, in the sense that we have to, we have to consciously cultivate that spark in us, which is like that. It is there, but you would think that it's anything but unconscious at the beginning. In the terms of a person who wants to become self-consciously sacrificial. So could you just kind of elaborate on that a bit, or correct me or whatever?
Jim, I agree with you. Better than the word, because remember, everything has intelligence, right? If we read the article, Psychic and Noetic Action, H.P. Blavatsky talks about it, intelligences, right? Yeah. So nothing is unconscious. I should have used the word spontaneous. That's a much better word. The choice of word unconscious, better than that would be, they're all intelligences, right? So I think the word spontaneous is a better word. I agree with you. There's nothing unconscious that is happening in the world. Everything is, there are intelligences. Maybe the action is spontaneous in certain cases. And when it comes to man, because of the manas, because of the lighting up of the manas, there is the possibility of achieving high, excellence, or, be the, like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde conundrum that we have as human beings. But definitely, it's all intelligences.
Well, I'm reminded too of what you're saying. I wish I could find that statement by, I think it was Confucius, who pointed to the fact that when he was 15, he had questions. When he was 25, it was this. When he was 35, it was this. And it just builds this tiered level of realization to where he said, when I was 70, then I could spontaneously enact the laws of heaven. So, the celestial laws. So he showed that there's a whole kind of progressive realization of what sacrifice means, and how it's bound up with thought, it's bound up with a vow, it's bound up with courage and taking a stand. So all these elements go into a human being being able to strip off all the lesser elements of the Namarupa, and then become a being who consciously sacrifices. And that's the beginning of his true humanity.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better.
Beautiful. Do we have any more questions for Shobha?
David Grossman was up for a minute.
David, you were there. Are you still there?
I am still here, but everybody's covered so much of what I was thinking about in such a beautiful way. But I was, maybe to put it a little other way, would be to think of sacrifice as the power of transformation. Because if we look at sacrifice as the idea to make sacred, and that's what consciously we're all aiming for, the refinement and transformation of the lower to the higher. It might be one one way to look at it. And one, of course, beautiful symbol of that I always think of is the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. You know, the caterpillar, in a sense, is sacrificed to release what the butterfly stands for.
Yeah, right. Yeah, beautiful. There's so many correlations here. Thanks, David. Yeah, so many correlations. And I thought of transformation. I thought of so many things. And I'm like, okay, let's just stick to this now. Because there are so many, how can I say it? It's like a mind map, right? You have so many spokes in this one word sacrifice. And also this transformation is hinted to by Mr. B.P. Wadia when he talks about Atma, Buddhi, Manas, all their roles. He's hinting at that they're all, this is the transformation that we as humans need to be working on. The transformation of the Manas to the Buddhic element. Yeah. So, and so on, So I think that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that extension. Thank you.
Fantastic. Laura?
Well, just to add to that extension is that is what Mr. Crosby said came to mind with David's and your comment and with Jim's, is that we become constitutionally incapable of a selfish act. And that's from Robert Crosby. So that is what we're transforming to.
Do you have the quote, Laura? I would love that.
Yeah, I will look for it, but it's in one of his letters.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look for it.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you, Laura.
I have two comments in the chat. The first one, I am not sure who this is from, but it says, but until that day of final triumph, someone has to be sacrificed, though we accept but voluntary victims.
Mahatma Letters.
That's from Mahatma Letters. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's from Miluka.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miluka. And there is another one here from Dr. Judy Savaker. That power which the disciple will covet will make him appear as nothing in the eyes of men. Master Halabian. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Great to be reminded of that one again.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
I think it is shall covet. I might have made a mistake in that, but the meaning is clear. And I think that's so important.
Yeah.
That you don't do theosophy to become someone famous or rich or well known or powerful.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
First of all, this is me trying the microphone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. My question, Shobha, was when you were talking about telling the story of Nachiketa's fire, I think you mentioned something about how Yama, there's some relationship between Yama and law.
Yeah. Let me see.
That intrigued me. And I'm not even sure it's an intelligent question, but I was just wondering just in case it is.
Yeah, this is, I looked at Aurobindo's rendition of the Upanishads too. I usually look at Ishwaran's rendition. I love that. But what I like about Aurobindo is he has the Sanskrit verses too. So I just like to just look at it. But he also has a lot of footnotes, Aurobindo, and he says that Yama is the lord of death, but is also the master of the law in the world. Because death is certain to all beings, right? And we have the Grim Reaper in the Western parlance, right, as a symbol. But in the East, and especially in India, the Yama is the master of its law. It's law. He's talking about law. But he's also considered to be the child of the sun. Now, I'd be very interested to see if Aurobindo expands on that somewhere else. Luminous master of truth from which the law is born. So that's so beautiful and so profound, but I don't know much more than that. But the thing is, I think the whole point is, why is Yama so powerful? That was the question that Aurobindo poses and answers. Says that he has a lot of knowledge, and he's the repository of all this, because he's the master of truth, it says. So I find it very interesting. I know that he is, Ishwaran has written a book called Dialogue with Death also, and I would be very interested, because many people have written about this, death, dialogue with death. But he probably writes it from the perspective of this story. So that's all I know, but I would love if anybody has more to add to this.
Well, just as a follow through, just listening from what you're saying, it does seem that at the moment of death, it's the moment of truth.
Mm.
There's no editing at that point. Right? So it's just, in other words, when a person sees the truth of things, isn't that kind of being closer to the law, perhaps? The law, cause and effect, for example?
Absolutely. You know, we do say in theosophy, right? When a person is ready to die, they see their whole life in front of them, correct? And people who have had near-death experiences talk about that too, right? So I think it's to me, it was just so profound. Because, you know, Yama, okay, he comes and takes you when you die. But no, it's much more than that. And it's the same thing with the Greek myths. When you look at all these gods and goddesses that you have in the Greek myths, and of course, one of my favorite is reading the Odyssey and looking at the behavior of all these gods. You know, and it's fascinating. And it's very similar to reading the Hindu mythology with all its gods. But each one has a place, you know, and it also reminds me of the Native American, you know, the four corners, the four directions, and all that. So there's so much of meaning in all this, and I'm sure it's there in every mythology, Norse as well. You know, I can't let anything else. I mean, I can't just say it's just some of them. But especially in this, when I read about Yama, it brought about, and what you said, that the moment of death is the moment of truth. So Yama can be the repository of so much knowledge. So I find it pretty, the more you think about it and ponder, it does make sense.
Thank you, Shobha.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Do we have any more questions for Shobha?
Yes, I was wondering about something.
Okay, Ken.
No, Shobha, this is Ken in the lodge here. You mentioned that sacrifice was universal and that it was the law of compassion, and that compassion is a law of harmony. Are these other phrases that might be attached to this concept of karma, that balancing act, that equilibrium?
You know, having read looking at the Katha Upanishad story, I think Nachiketas wants to go beyond, know more about karma, right? So that he can go beyond it. So the law of karma applies to all of us mortals, and I think the effects are only going to be when we are here, right? So if sacrifice is akin to compassion, wouldn't it be even beyond karma? I mean, just a thought. Just a thought. I may be wrong, but I was just thinking, could it be beyond karma? When we talk about the law of laws, Alaya's pure self, eternal harmony, a shoreless universal essence, the law of everlasting right and fitness of all things. The law of karma is probably an embodiment of this, but does that mean that that's what compassion is or sacrifice is? I'm just wondering. I don't know.
It definitely seems that all of these different qualities, your focus today was on sacrifice, but the word compassion, all of these different qualities seem to have their root and are one. And I think that that's the beauty and the point of such an amazing presentation that leads us to universalize these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So that place where even desire is mentioned, it's the point before manifestation, it would seem.
It would seem, right?
I don't know. Sure.
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. Judy, did you have something to add, please?
Yes, I just want to say I think that we should go to the voice of the silence, that the Sheila virtue, the key that balances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action. An action done out of true compassionate sacrifice would indeed go beyond karma and balance things out. And most of us have a long way to go, but that's a great point you bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's a good connection.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Miluka?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe that compassion is what I should say. Compassion is actually a law. Love and compassion is the same thing. So you can have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And regarding the quote I put on the chat, these volunteer victims, they're also among us. We could say HPV was one. She was, they did character assassination to her, and she suffered a lot with all the attacks.
Right.
Then we have, before that, you have Socrates and another great philosopher. They were all killed. And then you have Gandhi, that we had a lecture last week. And then Martin Luther King. And then Mother Teresa, although she wasn't killed, but also they tried to do character assassination at the end about her as well. So this is the voluntary victims that the masters are talking about. They're human beings out there that they're just trying to make a difference. And then at the end, they end up being killed.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Miluka.
Do we have any more comments or questions? Okay, then I'd just like to offer abundant thank you, Shobha, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And before we go, we'd like to remind you that next week's presentation at the Aquarian series will be titled Karma and Reincarnation. So hopefully all of you will come back for that one.
Yeah.
All right, Shobha. Thank you so very much. Namaste.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and everybody, and Shobha. Namaste.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. My pleasure.